الحمد لله الذي لم يزل عالما قديرا، وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد الذي أرسله إلى الناس كافة بشيرا ونذيرا، وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. أما بعد. My respected brothers, sisters and elders, alhamdulillah, this has already covered the benefits and the ayat and the ahadith regarding zakat. Now we'll move on to the ahkam and the rulings and the fiqh with regards to zakat. So now first the question is, who is required to give zakat? Who is required to give zakat? Imam Qudri rahimahullah mentions the zakat واجبة على الحر المسلم العاقل البالغ إذا ملك نصابا للكتامة وحال عليه الحول. In English. So there's a number of conditions that have to be met. The first condition is that someone has to be Muslim. So now you might say that obviously he has to be Muslim. Now how this applies is that when someone accepts Islam, they will not have to give zakat for all the previous years that they had wealth that had to be given zakat on. So they will not have to give zakat on the time before they were Muslim. So firstly is Muslim. Secondly, the condition is that one has to be an adult, meaning someone who's reached the age of puberty. Islam, we consider the age of puberty, not 18, age of puberty. Third condition is that the person has to be sane, that Islam does not require the insane to give the obligation of zakat, only those who are sane. Fourthly, someone has to own nisab, which I will get to, as well as the duration of one whole lunar year, which I will explain. So nisab, it translates to threshold, or like the minimum amount. So the threshold, Islam and Sharia have set a threshold that you meet this threshold, then you will be obligated to give zakat. If you do not meet this threshold, you will not be obligated. So how is this threshold calculated? It's calculated as two ways of calculating it. One is based on gold, and the other is based on silver. Now before, long ago, silver and gold, their values were comparatively close, relatively close. So one could choose which one. But nowadays, because the value of gold has skyrocketed, and the value of silver has gone down, the ulama, they say that we take the amount that is for gold. So now how it's calculated, it's 87.48 grams of gold, and the price of gold per gram as of today is $94.35. So it keeps fluctuating. So now based on that, the minimum amount, the threshold for zakat as of today is $8,253.74. So I'll repeat that, $8,253.74. It fluctuates by the day. So now if your zakatable assets reach this amount of around, let's say 8,000, then you will be obligated to give zakat. So that is the nisab, the threshold. So we should try to, if we're going to give zakat, we'll have to check online for the current and most accurate amount. Now that's nisab. So you have to own nisab. You have to own this amount in your zakatable assets. Now the last condition is the duration of the lunar year. So this is a bit tricky to understand. So now there's one thing called the zakat anniversary. This is the day when you acquire your assets reached nisab amount. So the day that your assets reach the nisab amount, that will be called the zakat anniversary. One whole lunar year afterwards, only then, if you have zakat at that one whole lunar year mark, at your zakat anniversary, then you will be required to give zakat. Now the thing to remember here is that we just consider the beginning and the end of the lunar year, meaning the zakat anniversary of 1 year and the second year when it comes again, that same date comes again. We just look at whether nisab, that threshold, was there in the beginning and in the end. It does not matter whether that amount dipped down in the middle of the year. Let's say in the middle of the year you became completely broke, you own no money. But at the end of the year you still have that 8,000 or so, then you will have to give zakat. So you just consider the beginning and the end of the year, or the one occurrence of the day and the second occurrence 1 year later, one lunar year later. So it doesn't matter whether it dips down in the middle, it just matters at the ends of the year. So now, to do this, one should note down whenever one has reached that amount for nisab, that minimum amount, one should note down that date and then check again 1 year later. And as Mufti Sahib mentioned, that giving zakat in Ramadan is not an obligation. That's a misconception. It's not obligatory in Ramadan. There's no set date. But it's good to give in Ramadan because the rewards will be multiplied. Some of it will be barakah, it will benefit the poor. Other reasons, but it's not required to give in Ramadan. It's just required to give at the ends of the lunar years. So now we cover the zakatable assets. What are the zakatable assets? What things will you factor in when you are calculating your zakat? So number one is obviously gold and silver. Gold and silver, those values will be added up into your zakatable assets. Second will be cash. Whatever cash you have will be included into that amount. Loans, right? Whatever loans you're owed, we're going to cover that in a little bit. Whatever loans you're owed, you will be include that in your assets. And then business stocks or business goods, they'll be added in. Agricultural produce, we generally don't have that, but that'll be included as well. And then animals and livestock, we also don't have those, but those are generally added into one's zakatable assets. Now what are not included in these zakatable assets? Number one is jewelry, besides gold and silver. So besides gold and silver, any other jewelry is not factored in. So even if you have millions of dollars in diamonds, for example, that will not be factored in. Second is cars and vehicles that are not for sale. Any cars and vehicles not factored in. Properties which are not for sale, not factored in. Properties on lease, not factored in. Electronics, right? You might have the most expensive devices, not factored in. Household appliances and furniture, not factored in. And then finally, material used for work, they will not be factored in. So all of these things will not be factored in when we're calculating our zakatable assets, just the ones I mentioned, the 16 that I mentioned before. Now one thing to note is that money acquired through haram does not enter one's ownership. So that money is like stolen money. So it's like money through interest, through cheating, through whatever. Money through haram is not factored into one's wealth. So that should just be given away in charity as soon as possible. That will not be factored into your assets. And you cannot obviously use haram money to pay zakat. So now I mentioned that we will factor in debts. So I'll just cover debts. There are two types of debts that are factored in the Sharia. One is the strong debt. So strong debt includes forwarding loans, meaning loans or money that other people owe you from a loan. Money that other people owe you from a loan, that's part of strong debt, as well as outstanding invoices. So someone owes you money after having bought something from you. So these two things fall under strong debt. So now with strong debt, these two things, the one who is owed the money, the creditor, he will have to pay zakat for that amount that he lent out, or whatever that he expected to receive. So he will factor that into his wealth. And then the one who is owing this money, the debtor, he will subtract this amount from his zakatable assets. So the one who is owed, he will factor it in, and the one who owes will not factor it in. And then also, if and it doesn't matter if one has received this money or not. If one is just owed it, that's all that matters. And then when one receives the money, then one will have to pay zakat in the previous years as well for this strong debt. So this is in the strong debt, the one who is owed will have to pay, and will pay after receiving the money, will pay for the previous years as well. The one who owes will not pay. So that is strong debt, and then there's a weak debt. Weak debt is, for example, money that someone owes you, for example, that's not in lieu of anything. Like for example, your wages are not in lieu of commodities. For example, your wages. You're owed your wages. You will not factor. Sorry. Someone owes someone else their wages that you have to pay your employees. So that is, you will not factor that into your zakatable assets. Or if someone, for example, there's unpaid rent. Right? There's unpaid rent. So that will not be factored in. Or even outstanding mahar payments, dowry payments, those will not factor in. Or outstanding inheritance payments, those will not be factored in. So zakat is not compulsory on these things until one receives it. So you will not factor those in until you receive it, and then the previous years it doesn't matter. Only after you receive that money will you pay that zakat. So those are strong debts and weak debts. Now with regards to if someone has a debt, if someone owes you money. If the debtor acknowledges the debt, then the creditor has to pay zakat on it, like we mentioned, strong debt, whether the debtor has paid it or not. But now let's say the creditor, he loses hope in receiving that money ever. That man just vanished. Right? Then he will not have to pay zakat on that debt that he's owed. He loses all hope of receiving money from this guy, he will not have to pay zakat on it anymore. But then let's say he comes after many years, he gives zakat, he gives that money back. Then one will have to pay zakat on the previous years for that debt. And if the debtor just denies the existence completely of that debt, then you don't have to pay any money on that debt. So it will not be factored into one's zakatable assets. And then there's also debt liabilities. There's short-term debt and long-term debt. So if we have short-term debt, then one will factor those into one's zakatable assets, that you will deduct those short-term debts from your zakatable assets. But then with long-term debts, for example, like mortgages or other long that span years, then there's two opinions with regards to this. The first opinion, the lenient one, is that you just subtract the amount that you will pay in the whole year. Whatever you will pay in the whole year of that long-term debt, you will subtract that from your zakatable assets. That's the lenient opinion. But the more strict opinion, the one that's more taqwa, fear of Allah Ta'ala, the more cautious one, is that you just subtract the amount that one is due to pay in that month itself. The month that you're giving zakat in, you will just subtract that amount from the long-term debt. So just to brief, the debts which are due within the month are deductible, and those which are beyond that amount. So now, what else can we deduct from our assets? Other things are, for example, our basic living expenses, like utilities and bills and rent.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Salat time from today is 8:10. But inshallah, because this is an important topic, we will give 10 extra minutes to the speaker, inshallah. So we'll pray 8:20 today, inshallah. Just a second. Forgive us, please.
Okay. So now what we are deducting from, what are our deductible liabilities? What can we take from our employees? We can take those out when we're calculating. Or unpaid dowry that one intends on paying within that month, that you intend on paying a set amount from the dowry for your wife within that month, you can take that out from your assets. Another is loans, like I mentioned, is loans which are going to be paid within that month. So now, one question that many people have is with regards to their 401ks, brokerage IRA, and pension plans. So in a 401k and IRA, the employee or the individual, he has the option to opt in or to opt out, right? And they are the investor. And in a pension plan, the employee, he invests for the employer invests for the employee, and it is not something that the employee can opt out of. So now, if you can opt out of it, that is part of your wealth, and if you cannot opt out of it, that is not your wealth. So now, in summary, there is zakat on 401ks and IRA, and there's no zakat on pension plans or social security. And so whatever you can opt in or opt out of, you will pay zakat on. Whatever you cannot opt out of, you do not have to pay zakat on. Now, with regards to the 401ks, there's two types of it. There's unvested and vested. So if it is unvested, meaning that it's not handed to you, then there is no zakat on that one. So if it's unvested, there's no zakat, and if it is vested, there is zakat. So now, let's say if it is vested, there's the question that should one subtract the fees charged for withdrawing the 401k if one subtracts it early? There are fees. So should one subtract those? That when you're calculating whether in your 401k you're calculating it, should one subtract those fees or not? There's two opinions. One is that you do subtract those fees, and the other is that you pay the complete amount. So you have both options. The more cautious approach would be to calculate with the fees that the whole amount. You take out the whole amount. Alright, so now, as I mentioned, so these are, we will calculate our zakat, we'll factor in the things I mentioned, and take out the liabilities that I mentioned, and then from that, we will take 2.5% of that. So 2.5%. So now we move on to the recipients of zakat, who will be receiving zakat. Before going into that, when we're paying zakat, we have to have the intention to pay zakat. It cannot be that, well, I was giving sadaqah, I was giving in charity the whole year, I'll just consider that my zakat in retrospect. That doesn't work. One has to have the intention when giving that amount. So intention is necessary. And if one is paying on behalf of one's spouse or children, one has to get their approval and their acknowledgement beforehand. One has to get their approval and acknowledgement, then only can one pay on their behalf. And zakat will only be valid when there's something called tamlik. Tamlik means a transferal of ownership. That the wealth has to transfer from your ownership to the ownership of one of the eligible recipients. So for example, you cannot give it to an entity or like a corporation or other like a building or organization. That's not how it works. It has to be into the ownership of the eligible recipient for that zakat. And also, it cannot be in a remuneration for anything. Like you ask someone to do something for you, and you pay him, and you have intention for zakat. It has to be just a transfer of ownership without any in lieu of anything. Now, what are the recipients? So Allah Ta'ala mentioned in the Quran, Allah Ta'ala said, إنما الصدقات للفقراء والمساكين والعاملين عليها والمؤلفة قلوبهم وفي الرقاب والغارمين وفي سبيل الله وابن السبيل. So the first category is the poor and the needy, meaning those who do not own any zakatable assets nor surplus assets beyond the personal needs that equal nisab. So when we're calculating whether we can give zakat or not, we will check the specific things that I mentioned, that do they all total to reach that minimum amount, that nisab, that minimum threshold. But when we're considering who to give zakat to, then we will also factor in their other assets. All the rest of the assets, we will factor that in. Their houses or their cars, we'll add in all of those things. Whether to see if they're eligible for zakat or not, beyond their personal expenses. So we will we'll try to include more people in that, that. And those are the poor and the needy, meaning those who have not reached this minimum threshold. And the second category is debtors, meaning those whose liabilities, they exceed their zakatable assets and their surplus assets. So their debt is more than that, then you can give them your zakat. Third category is travelers, meaning not just any traveler. You can go travel and get zakat, that's not how it works. Those who are in dire need and they have no access to their personal wealth. Like if we go somewhere and we lose our cash, we'll still have our debit cards and our credit cards, right? We might work internationally with some fees. So we will not be eligible for zakat. If let's say we lost access to everything, we lost access to our accounts, our cards, anything, then only would we be eligible, or someone else would be eligible for zakat when they have no access to their wealth as a traveler. A fourth category is fi sabilillah. This applies to those mujahideen striving in the path of Allah Ta'ala. That's not really here today. And people try to apply this for other things. It doesn't apply for anything. It only applies to those who are fighting in Allah Ta'ala's path, and they cannot find those right now. The next category is mu'allafat al-qulub. It's mentioned in the Quran. It means those non-Muslims or Muslims whose hearts are drawn near to Islam, like giving them some kind of money. Now this category, it existed during the time of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, but during the time of Umar radiallahu anhu, him and the Sahaba, they all agreed that this category does not apply anymore. So this category, there's ijma', there's agreement of all the Sahaba, all the scholars that this category does not apply anymore. And finally, the final category is these zakat collectors, and this is specifically those commissioned by the Islamic State to collect zakat. It doesn't apply to those working for these organizations, only those commissioned by the Islamic State. So these are the 6 categories of zakat. Generally, we give to the first category, meaning the poor and needy, those whose zakatable assets and surplus assets do not reach the minimum threshold, like we mentioned, around $8,000. Now, who cannot accept, or what cannot accept zakat? General welfare projects, they cannot accept zakat. Hospitals, they cannot accept zakat. Institutions or madrasas or masajid, they cannot accept zakat. Construction projects from masajid or other places, they cannot accept zakat. And then the family, the Banu Hashim, the family of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and the descendants of Abbas radiallahu anhu, Harith, Ja'far, Aqil radiallahu anhu, though their descendants, they cannot receive zakat. Also, obviously, someone who has nisab, someone has the minimum threshold, and then one's wife or husband, one's spouse, you cannot give to your spouse. You cannot give to your parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, anyone, your lineage above. As well as your descendants, your children, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren, you cannot give to those. However, you can give to those, so on the right and the left, meaning your siblings, your uncles, those other relatives, you can give zakat to. Just your descendants and your lineage or your ancestors, you cannot give them zakat. Also, one cannot give zakat to non-Muslims. People try to give zakat to non-Muslims. We cannot give zakat to non-Muslims, as well as employees, as remuneration, or even prisoners. So now there's a section on business. We won't do those. I'll just cover a few important general questions that people have. So firstly, is intention required when giving zakat? I mentioned that it is required. Does the recipient need to know that they're receiving zakat? That is not a requirement. The recipient does not need to know that they're getting zakat. You can even see it as a gift. They don't need to know that they're getting zakat. Someone might ask that I paid zakat on my jewelry last year, you have to pay again? You have to pay every year. Is it permissible to pay zakat on behalf of a baligh child, someone who reached the age of puberty? Yes, it is granted that they have given their consent. If someone says that I've set aside money for sadaqah or for hajj or some other good purpose, I have this for Allah Ta'ala, I've set this money aside. Do I have to give zakat on that? Yes, you do. I have to give zakat on that before it is paid to whatever cause it may be. Can zakat be used to fulfill the debts of a deceased person? No, it cannot. Right? It can only be given to the living. If my husband gave me zakat, right? If my husband gave me jewelry, gold and silver, can the husband pay? The husband can pay, granted there is consent from the wife. If there's outstanding zakat for numerous years, one will have to calculate it based on the current value of the market price, the current market price, not of all those years that it was accrued. If someone said that I have kept money for my children's wedding, you have to give zakat on that amount. Can zakat be paid in advance? Yes, it can be paid in advance, but you have to check at that zakat anniversary, you have to check that whether you paid enough or not. So if it was not enough, you will have to pay the remainder. If it was beyond that, what was extra will be sadaqah for Allah Ta'ala. If someone says, I have some interest money in my account, do I need to pay zakat? Like I mentioned, do not pay zakat on interest. That money has to be given away in sadaqah. If someone says that I have a few houses with no intention of selling them, there's no zakat on those extra houses. If someone is receiving rental income from other houses, there will be zakat on the income, not the property itself. And so with that, we'll end, inshallah. So may Allah Ta'ala give us the ability to pay this obligation. This, by the way, zakat is an ibadah. We shouldn't consider it a burden. It is an ibadah from Allah Ta'ala. May Allah Ta'ala accept it. May Allah Ta'ala accept all of it. Ameen wa rahmatullahi.